Books we read. Books we read.
La 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 la.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Between the Pages. Today we're joined by Gabby. She's someone who brought a fresh perspective on a classic literature, and today she'll be sharing her insights on a beloved novel, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. To know more, stay tuned. Let's welcome Gabby. Oh, and hey, don't forget to share this with your friends and family and subscribe for more bookish content. Hi Gabby, welcome to Between the Pages.
Thank you for having me here.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good as well.
Nice.
So, tell us about yourself.
I am a mom of 3. I recently had a baby, and I am an avid book reader, and I love music. I'm also a music teacher, and I studied history. I majored in history, which is one of the reasons why I love a lot of classical books, because they give you so much of history on the time period in which it was written. So for me, history and literature is very close to my heart.
I see. So, can you tell us about some of your favorite reads?
Favorite?
Reads.
My favorite reads is Pride and Prejudice, top of the list. In fact, that was my favorite book from the time I was 14 or 15 perhaps, till today. Every year I have to read it at least once. I have to read it. So if there was a book I had to read all over again for the first time, Pride and Prejudice would be one of them.
And that's the book you're here with today.
Yes.
So, you said that you read it every year.
I have to read it every year at least once.
So, how does your perspective of the story change every time you read it?
So see, there are many characters in this book. And every time you read the book, at least for me, every time I read the book, every character comes out in a different way. So initially, when I first read the book, I thought that the antagonist is Mr. Darcy. That, you know what, he deserved what he got in the middle of the book. But then when I read it the second time, I realized he himself was coming from a background of his own history and his own, let's say, the problems that he had to perhaps grow up with. Being the firstborn, there was a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. You have to understand that this book was written in the 19th century.
So, it was, I think, written 200 years ago.
200, yeah, 1813, 1815, I guess it was when it was written. And at that time, there was a lot of, if a man had children, if he had girls, the property didn't go to the girls, the property went to the boys. And Mr. Darcy happened to be the firstborn, and his father apparently was a man of a lot of wealth, and he had a lot of property, and kind of fell on his shoulders to maintain all that. And he had a younger sister, and there was a huge age difference between the two of them, and he had to look after his sister after his parents passed away. So every time I read the book, so for the first time when I read the book, Mr. Darcy was a person. The next time I read the book, I felt a little more compassion for Elizabeth Bennet, who's the main protagonist. I felt a little more compassion for her mother. Like I said, there's a time this book was written in a period where the property and the money wouldn't go to the female side of the line, right? And she had 5 daughters in that time, imagine. And you have 5 daughters, and her main preoccupation was to get those daughters married off well. And it was important for her to see her children well settled. But in that whole getting entrapped in that, what happened was she became very manipulative. So every time I read the book, there was another character which kept popping up. And of course, the most funny of them all, I would always say, would have to be Mr. Colin. Because from the start, I felt like just taking the book and banging it on his head. He never changed. Of course, he never changed. From the first time I read it till the last time that I read it a few months ago, I just felt like taking the book and banging it on his head.
Who is Mr. Collins?
So Mr. Colin is like Elizabeth Bennet. Mr. Colin is her cousin, who the property is meant to go down to, because Mr. Bennet has 5 daughters, and none of them can inherit the property or the wealth. And Mr. Colin, because he is the first man on the side, on the cousin side, he is to inherit all that property and that wealth.
I see.
So, and it kind of goes to his head. So he rules over the house when he comes to visit his cousins, and he's like, oh, this is my house, it's going to be my house one day, sort of attitude. So, yeah.
So how do you think Mr. and Mrs. Bennet influenced the sisters' lives and choices?
So, from what I understood and from what is also said a few times in the book, is Mr. Bennet kind of settled with Mrs. Bennet. You know? So the book initially, when it was written, was not meant to be Pride and Prejudice. It was meant to be first impressions. So his first impression of Mrs. Bennet was someone who was beautiful and someone who was jovial and, you know, happy-go-lucky. I believe she was around 16 or 17 when they met. So pretty young when they got married. And only once he got married to her did he realize that this is not who I want to spend the rest of my life with. And that influenced a lot Elizabeth and Jane and Elizabeth rather, because Jane is the firstborn. So Jane becomes the kind of woman who is a little more recluse, because she can see so much of, let's say, division between the parents. And because Elizabeth is the second born, she has absolutely nothing to prove for herself. So she's a very free person. She says her mind, she does what she has to do. She's very independent that way, very, very independent, which is what I love about her. Which is what also, you know, because I was 15, I think. I think I was in 8th, so that would have been 14 when I read it for the first time. That is what impressed me a lot when I read it, because she was so independent, Elizabeth. And because her mother wanted her to just get married to someone rich and someone who she could settle down with, that is exactly who she didn't want to get married to. Okay, so when she saw Mr. Darcy for the first time, the first impression that she had was someone who was proud. She said, I would never ever marry a person like you.
Yeah, I saw the trailer of the movie, so I got that bit.
The Keira Knightley one?
I'm not sure.
Keira Knightley, I believe. It's a recent movie, but there have been a lot of adaptations for movies as well for this. So then she didn't want to marry Mr. Darcy. But at the same time, there were a lot of, you know, when you see a person for the first time, that cannot be a first impression. Like a book cannot be judged by its cover, right? So she judged him. He was too proud also. So that kind of influenced their relationship as well when they were together.
I see. So what was your favorite scene or dialogue from the book?
I think it has to be the time, because I'm a romantic at heart. It has to be the time when Elizabeth goes to Mr. Darcy's house in Pemberley, and she looks all around and says, because of course her feelings towards him changes a lot, and she's looked around at the property and everything and said, you know what, I could have been the lady of all this. And when she meets him, and then something just clicks in her, and she realized that whatever she thought about him, whatever impressions she had about him, whatever prejudices she had against him were wrong and baseless, based on the fact that someone else had told her about it. The antagonist of the book, if you can call him an antagonist, Mr. Wickham. So when that happened, I was like, oh my gosh. Of course, I'm not going to ruin the end. I want everyone to read the book. I'm not going to ruin it. So when I read that part, I was feeling so sorry for Elizabeth. And I'm not the kind of person who can, you know, wait. I cannot take suspense. So I had to go to the end of the book to see what happened. Okay, all is well. Go back to that place and then carry on reading, because my heart is at peace. I know things go well. So yes, it had to be that point where there's like a flip in the entire way in that she is thinking. That is when things changed.
So what do you think about Jane Austen's writing style?
So I think it is very, very apt for this book. Very, very apt. Even if she had kept First Impressions, would have been good. But Pride and Prejudice is like the heart of the book. One has pride, one has prejudice. Until both of them crush those ideas of what they have of each other, they cannot get the true essence of love. Only once they come down on their ideas and come down on their preconceptions and pre-notions of each other do they come to the purest form of love. And that is when the book happens, you can say.
I see. And how does the relationship between the protagonists compare to relationships today in this world right now?
I think, Elizabeth Bennet, a lot of girls can relate to her anywhere in the world. In fact, when the book, the first part of the book is, it starts with, it is a truth universally acknowledged. Okay, so when you start a book like that, especially when you're doing it in 1813, and if you're reading this now in 2024, it is still universally acknowledged that if you are a single woman, you have to find somebody to be with for the rest of your life. It's not the same for a man, right? And for Elizabeth, that becomes kind of her, doesn't become her personality, but she doesn't allow that to define her life. She's a woman who has her head on her shoulders. She knows what she wants, and she will not settle for less. After everything that she has seen in her relationship with her family and the friends around her. And that is something that is very relevant, should be very relevant, even for girls of today. Don't settle for less. Wait for your Mr. Darcy, he will come along.
And did you agree with the decisions that Elizabeth made throughout the story?
I would say, that every decision that she made her into the round character that she was at the end of the book. So when she started initially, she was full of herself and she was very confident. It's good to be confident, but to a point where she couldn't see beyond the barrier of the social prejudices, which didn't allow her to see beyond that. Not that Mr. Darcy was innocent or anybody else was innocent, but what happens with her throughout the book is that she realizes slowly that every choice that she has made has helped her in a way to receive the happiness that she did at the end of the book. So I couldn't say, because of this choice, something bad happened, but I would say if I was Miss Elizabeth Bennet staying in 1813 and if I had a marriage proposal, especially when there was no security in the family, no financial security, you take the first proposal you get and you get married, right? But she didn't. She stood up for herself and she had the courage to wait for the time to come along.
Patience.
Exactly. She had the patience to come along. I think the one choice that she did make was befriending Mr. Wickham and listening to him, because that had a lot to play in what could have been a risk with a lot in her future happiness. Because, of course, it's a romantic book, so there has to be a twist. But it could be, that she wouldn't have had the second chance with him. And that was because of everything that she heard from Mr. Wickham. And she based all her judgments on what he had said. So, but of course, everything that she did in the end turned out well. Like if she didn't have to know certain things about the characters, about Mr. Wickham or Mr. Colin or her mother or her father, everything that she did and said, if she didn't have to do it at that point, she wouldn't have found out a lot of things about herself as well.
I think that's what makes the character more authentic and relatable
Exactly. Because there's this part in the book where she says, I was so foolish for having judged, but she wouldn't have come to that part or that realization without first making those mistakes, right? Everyone makes mistakes. Everybody learns from those mistakes. Some mistakes, of course, hit you harder. So
we have a tradition in this podcast where every guest writes a question for the next guest. So I have a question for you, and it's from Mr. Chetan. And he's asking, what do you do just for play? No expectations, no getting better at it, just play.
I have a creative streak in me. So if I see something new, like my latest fad is pottery. So I have my head on it right now. Until I learn it, I will not be at peace. Before this, it was something else. It was stitching. So till I did it, till I got it out of my system, I had to just do it. So just for play, yeah. So at the moment, to relax, I always find new ways of keeping myself occupied, keeping myself entertained. So yeah.
Well, it's your turn to write a question.
Okay.
So, is there anything you would like to ask me before we end this?
Are you going to read the book?
Yes, I've been meaning to. I'm just trying to find a person who I can borrow it from if you.
I am so sorry. This is not a book. I'll give you another version of it, but not this one.
Sure.
You know, they say there are two kinds of fools: one who lends books, and the other is the one who gives it back. So I'm not going to be the first type, and I hope you're never the second type, because once you find a book that you really love.
So, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for
I had
having
a great
me.
time talking books with you.
Me too.
I hope you guys liked today's discussion. Until next time, it's me, Anna Lillaney, closing the BDP book for this week. See you soon.
La 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 la.